It's going to be a weird episode today because we're talking about a very weird team. I really don't know if they're good or not. I don't even think Saints fans know if they're good or not. If you watched this team last year, it was, I wouldn't even say it's a roller coaster because they were just so confusing. Like, I wouldn't even call it inconsistent. They were so confusing because they were so good and so bad at the same time. They were incredibly frustrating. They were an analytics darling that just couldn't win games they were supposed to win. There was a lot to praise about them, but so much to criticize. You know, there was a lot of turnover in the offseason in terms of the coaching staff, which probably explains some of that. But yeah, I would say this is going to be one of the hardest episodes to do because I truly don't know what I'm looking at with the Saints. Like, you could sell me on 11 games and winning the division. You could sell me on they're cleaning house at the end of the year. Like, I got nothing.
It's a funny team to watch, and by funny, Saints fans, I don't mean funny, ha-ha. I mean odd, because we'll talk about a bunch of numbers that point to them being outstanding or should have been. We'll point to a bunch of numbers which do not. Quarterback play was the same way. Had some moments of, oh, wow, yeah, they can absolutely beat anybody. And some moments of, I don't think they could beat the local high school team today. It's an up and down team. They're going to have to find some consistency. I think our best hope for the episode is just to present the facts and let everybody make their own conclusions, because if we make conclusions right now, we're probably just going to be wrong.
I'll tell you right now, this episode is going to be very hopeful for Saints fans and also very critical at the same time. I don't know if we're going to help them parse out what their favorite team is. Again, we're just going to present the data. We're going to present the facts. We're going to talk about some of the changes they made in the coaching staff that may or may not improve things in 2024. All I'll say is this is one of the only actual wild card teams in the league. And I don't mean wild card in terms of like
wild card playoffs.
I'm talking wild card in the sense that I really don't know what we're going to get in a good and a bad way. So, again, Saints fans, hunker down. Big episode today. It's your day today, of course. Jay, Autumn, Anthony, roll the intro. Welcome back once again to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett. That's EJ. Talking Saints today from up here in the Pacific Northwest, out here on the water in the Puget Sound from Anderson Island. It's a beautiful day, obviously. We thought about going outside to shoot this episode, but unfortunately there is a breakfast buffet for a lot of seagulls going on right now, and they're being very loud about it, so we're shooting inside.
Audio's a little bit easier in here, but yeah, it's showing off. Glad it gets to while you're up here. You don't think it's all gray, doom and gloom. Of course, we can tell everybody it's all gray, doom and gloom. Don't move here. It's always awful.
Yes, if there's one thing Pacific Northwesterners love the most, it's gatekeeping where they live, so that the rest of us Californians don't come up here.
And when you say the rest, because so many of you are already here.
I mean, have you seen the home prices in California?
I have.
Where else are we going to live, EJ, other than the rest of the country? Driving up everybody else's property values. It's what we do best. All right, talking Saints today. Before I go down a real estate doom and gloom rabbit hole, before we get into all the existential crisis and everything like that. All right, actually, no. Today it probably is an existential crisis if I think about it, because Saints fans went through a lot of shit last year. I know they won 9 games. They were knocking on the door of the playoffs. They finished the year strong. But even Saints fans would say when they were watching this team that it just didn't feel right.
It didn't feel that way. It didn't feel like a lot of the strength metrics that we're going to talk about translated to their every Sunday experience on the field. It was a very different feel. It was more tenuous. It was more up and down. It was more, I'm not sure what we're going to get today. And that's not a great feeling to have as a football fan. I don't know that we're going to quell any of those fears and say that it's not going to happen again in 2024 today. We'll start by talking about what happened in 2023. That sets the stage. We won't spend too long on it because you all watched it. And then we'll go into the changes they made to try and check the boxes off to fix those things so that it doesn't happen again, or at least they all don't happen again. So you don't just get a carbon copy of last season, which would not be super fun.
I want to give a little caveat, by the way, for all the stats you're about to hear. The Saints did have, tied with the Falcons, of course, the easiest strength of schedule in the league. So you're going to hear a lot of positive numbers today, but keep in mind they played a lot of really, really bad teams. I want to say their strength of schedule was like around 425, 430, somewhere in that ballpark. I know it was under 450. So very few times last year did they actually face a quote-unquote good team. And they put up some really nice numbers as a result of that. But at the same time, those numbers were, what's the word? Not deceiving. Juiced?
They come with context.
They come with context.
They come with nuance. So 2023 Saints, overall record 9-8 against that easy schedule. Second in the division, 5-3 at home, 4-5 on the road, very balanced. Last 5 games, and this is usually a cause for hope, 4-1. Teams that finish strong down the stretch tend to have a better season the next year than teams that don't. We'll see if that holds true for the Saints. So we've got an effectiveness summary for you this year, and it's really 2 numbers. Last year, we introduced you to Power Score. This year, we're going to introduce you to a metric called QBS, or quarterback support. I came up with it a couple of months ago with Arjun Menon from PFF. It's 5 statistics that really set the table for how well should a team have done. Power Score is how well they actually did. QBS says, given all the things that you had on offense, there's 3 offensive ranks, a defensive rank, and a special teams rank. How good was this team around the quarterback? How well did you set the table for them to win games? So it's a 0 to 100 scale, 100 the best, 0 the worst. The Saints were a 64.5. That placed them 12th out of 32 teams. That's pretty darn good for a team that didn't win its division. That's a lot of support. As we transition to Power Score, we introduced it to it last year. 6 statistics: rushing offense, rushing defense, passing defense, points scored, and points allowed. We simply assign the team their league rank. Were they 10th? Were they 15th? Everybody wants to be first in all those, but of course they can't be. Saints were 19th in rushing offense, 15th in passing offense. Great rush defense. They were 3rd. Pass defense, they were 9th. Again, top 10 team. Points scored, 9th. We'll talk about how that's a little bit deceiving. And points allowed, 8th. So a lot of single-digit numbers in there, a lot of top 10 numbers for a team that, again, didn't feel like a top 10 team for most of the year. The asterisks on points scored, they were right at the middle of the league until they played the Falcons and hung 45 on them at the end of the year.
Not even 45, 48.
48.
It was 48-17.
They
They dumped on them in the last week, right? They were dead-ass average in terms of points scored at 16th. That bumped them all the way up to 10th in terms of points per game. So, yeah, again, I don't want to say it's deceiving because you don't get to those types of numbers by accident, but at the same time, they did beat the hell out of some pretty bad teams last year, like 34-0 against the Patriots. That happened. You know, they played against the Titans. They played against the Falcons, who were not good last year. We talked about them yesterday, about how much they underperformed relative to the quality of their roster. And I would guess the mark of a good team is beating the crap out of bad teams. But again, you would expect against the worst strength of schedule for them to have done that more. And I think overall that's what frustrated Saints fans last year, and especially frustrated them with the offensive staff, is like Saints fans knew they were playing against bad teams. Like, they pay attention to the rest of the league.
Sure.
Like, Saints fans are actually one of the fan bases that I think pays the most attention to what's going on outside of New Orleans. They knew they were playing against bad teams, and I think the whole time they were thinking, why aren't we murdering everybody? Like, it just felt like this team vastly underperformed for what they should have been.
Interestingly enough, and here's where the contradiction comes in. So when you take those 6 ranks from Power Score and you average them out, their Power Score was 10.5. Lower is better in Power Score. Everybody wants to be number 1. That was the 6th overall best Power Score in the league.
And it just didn't feel like it. Like, when you're watching their games, that's why this team is so weird.
Exactly, but they set the table at 12th for QBS. They were 12th in terms of how they should have done and they were 6th in terms of how they did do. So they actually overperformed, which is, again, backwards.
As a 9-win team.
It doesn't feel like that at all. So here's where the Saints get really weird and contradictory, right? Most teams that we say, oh, they were up and down and they were inconsistent, and you'd say, oh, well, they should have done this well, and they actually did this well. The Saints, it's reversed. They set the table at the 12th best level in the league, and they performed at the 6th best level in the league.
This is a team that breaks every statistical model.
Yes.
The New Orleans Saints, which honestly, if you watch a lot of NFC South football, shouldn't shock you because the NFC South never makes sense. This team really does not make sense.
Yeah, typically any team that has a top 10 defense, we're among the top 10 in points scored. Any of those teams, that's a top 10 team, not languishing near 500, and the Saints were the latter.
Now, hearing all of that, I'm sure Saints fans are then wondering, okay, how?
What the hell, man?
Like, what can we point to give us some sort of context of what the hell was even going on last year? Again, the offensive staff was mostly replaced, and we'll get into some of the names who did that, but I want to talk about what they did last year specifically, or rather what caused them the most problems last year specifically from a schematic perspective and a data perspective on offense, right? So Kubiak and Benton are coming in probably to import, a Kubiak Shanahan style. Clint is Gary's son. Kyle used to coach under Gary. Gary used to coach under Kyle's dad. So, family business going multiple generations, right? So we expect a lot of the wide zone stuff, a lot of the play action stuff, lots of deep crosses to Olave, all that. John Benton, he coached with Kyle in San Francisco for a while. He was the offensive line coach there. So they're going to install that type of offense, right? Pretty wildly different, I would say, to what they did last year under Carmichael and his staff, which was mostly cleaned out. I would say the hallmark of the Saints offensively last year was getting to the red zone and then completely stalling out. They were 8th in terms of red zone trips per game at 3.5. That's really good, by the way. If you're getting into the red zone 3 to 4 times per game, you expect to score a lot of points. But at the same time, they only scored touchdowns on 53% of those red zone trips, which was well below average in the league. So they would give themselves opportunities and then completely flame out. So they were, trading 3s for 7s, so to speak. It also kind of explains why their EPA was so high, because it's expected points added. It doesn't measure actual points scored. So that's how you end up with top 10 APAs, but you're hanging, dead average in terms of points scored until the last game of the year when you put up 48. They were 12th in most passing and receiving categories that matter last year, except for yards after the catch. So it felt like everything they got was because of, Derek Carr pushing the ball down the field. They were not a team, that was just going to make something happen in space and kind of get cheap, easy yards. It just felt like everything was hard. They were second to last in terms of yards after the catch per reception at only 3.5, which is not good at all. They were absolutely dead last in terms of play action usage. When I say that things are going to change under Kubiak, that's one of the big numbers. They are going to be a heavy play action team because that's the world he comes from. They were also the second lowest in terms of motion percentage at only 37%. Again, that is going to increase a lot just because of the world that Kubiak and Benton come from. Tackle, I would say, was their obvious weak spot last year. They did address that in the draft, and we'll get to Fuaga and all that. But when you combine, I would say, a static, not innovative offense whatsoever that puts everything on Derek Carr's plate because, again, we are not using any sort of play action to open up the middle of the field. We have bad tackle play. We struggle to convert in the red zone. I now kind of understand a little bit more how their EPA was so good, but their actual effectiveness was so bad. They were the team that almost got there over and over and over again, which must have been just a fucking nightmare for Saints fans to watch last year. Because again, every week you're like, how are we losing? How is this even remotely possible?
Execution was such a thing for them last year in terms of, yes, they'd complete the pass, and know they'd get no more yards after that. And so you'd see it's almost like the first 2/3 of what you need to do on any given play. And then you're like, and break a tackle and spin out, get 6 more yards down the sideline. Nope. They would get exactly the chunk sort of as expected when you talk about EPA. Yes, we completed the pass, went down. It was almost like they were just stacking, Legos or bricks, right? But they never got that big explosion where somebody comes, just wipes the table off and gives you 7 points. So they would work and work and work and work. They would get to the red zone, and then it wouldn't work, wouldn't break the tackle. They'd have to settle for 3, right? They'd be like, well, we got there, which is 2/3 of the expectation, but we didn't score, right? We completed the pass, but we didn't get, the extra 20 yards on the long crosser that we hoped to have. It was just like, we get this, it's expected. We get this, it's expected. That's a tough way to play football.
There was like a comical amount of consecutive red zone trips they had in the middle of the year where they didn't score a touchdown. I can't remember the exact number. Saints fans, you'll have to chime in the comments, but I guarantee you some of them have it on the top of their head, because it was everything it was the only thing I would say that people were talking about in New Orleans sports talk radio for a solid 3 to 4 week stretch of how are they constantly stalling out?
I remember seeing that statistic at that time and going, no.
It's you didn't accidentally score a touchdown one time.
Because I watched a lot of the Saints games, not every single one, not in full, not every down of every game. And I was like, I don't remember seeing one, but, I didn't watch all the play. Really? Is that true?
It was 3 or 4 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
Where they didn't get any.
It's 17 trips or something. It was
crazy.
Ridiculous.
All of that is probably the best transition we're going to get to talking about all of the new faces on this coaching staff, by the way. Not just Kubiak and Benton, but really the remaking of the whole offensive staff, which, unfortunately was very necessary. Carmichael was there forever, but it was very clear last year that change was coming and change was needed, and a lot of changes happened.
Things come at you fast in the NFL. Again, Carmichael, one of the longest tenured coaches in the NFL with one organization, but didn't keep up, and it's a results-based business. If you don't do what you need to do, it's a meritocracy. You're eventually going to get moved out. Saints made that choice. In terms of long-tenured folks at the top, Mickey Loomis also has been with one organization for seemingly forever as the GM of the Saints. Dennis Allen's been there longer than you'd think. Comes up with some very solid results. I wouldn't say spectacular, but solid. You talked about Clint Kubiak coming in as the offensive coordinator. First year as the Saints OC, was with San Francisco last year as the passing game specialist. 11th year coaching in the NFL. He was a safety at Colorado State.
Yeah, I think at that time his dad was still coaching the Broncos back in the day.
Yep.
Which, back in the day for me was Gary Kubiak, Texans coach, and then he went to the Broncos, and now it's been long enough that is back in the day, where his son's been in the NFL for 11 years since then. So I am ancient, I guess, just withering away over here.
Yeah, I'm sure you're farting dust as we speak. Defensive coordinator Joe Woods, we won't talk about him a lot. It's his second year. Last year was his first, and it was incredibly successful. Special teams coach Darren Rizzi. On offense, some of the notable assistants: Rick Dennison, senior offensive assistant, 28 years of NFL coaching experience, over 3 decades of football coaching experience, 28 years in the NFL. You want to lean on somebody to change an offense? Having a guy like that around. We see more and more NFL staffs that grab the, grizzled old wizard who knows everything about offense and has done it for 3 decades, and just have them as a sounding board or someone that you can assign special projects to and say, hey, I really need to know formation stuff. Because there's nothing they haven't seen. So Rick Dennison serves that role for the Saints. John Benton, the offensive line coach, replaces Doug Marrone, formerly with the Jets and the 49ers as an offensive line coach. So again, comes from that Shanahan system. Extremely experienced with coaching wide zone, so that's why we expect that the Saints are going to run more of that and install that this year. He's the guy that gets to fix Trevor Penning, because
gets to fix Trevor Penning, not has to fix Trevor Penning.
You get to clean the board. In
Everybody's careers depend on fixing Trevor Penning at this point.
Certainly an all eyes on situation. it was one of the weak points in the offensive line last year. It caused a lot of their problems offensively, and if they're going to rebound from that, they've got to figure out a solution. So that's solidly on Benton's plate. Keith Williams is wide receiver coach, replacing Cody Burns. Receivers had a lot of issues last year. If we mentioned some of them statistically, but also just watching them on the field, two of them ending up in the same place happened a lot of the time. Just things you don't want to see at a pro-level offense. Williams, super experienced, comes over from Baltimore. He's been there the last 3 years. Super highly regarded receivers coach. He's also the personal receivers coach for Tyreek and Devontae. And way back in the day, kicking off his career, he was the guy that got Devontae to Fresno State.
And Devontae credits Keith Williams with instilling in him a lot of the principles that allowed him to become a dominant route runner. And same thing for Tyreek. In fact, I think the first look that people got, at least public look, that people got of Keith Williams was he was in a Destroying video back in the day, when it was just like 3 or 4 years ago, where Destroying, well, back in the day being 4 years ago, God. I mean, you know what I mean, a while ago. Because it was while he was training Tyreek in the offseason. Destroying went down to do like one-on-ones against Tyreek, and of course, like, Tyreek smokes everybody. But you kind of got a good look at Keith Williams and the drills he puts guys through in the offseason, everything like that. So he's been doing it a long time. A lot of very high-level receivers, both from the NFL all the way down to youth football, go to him to learn the craft. And I think they brought him in specifically to turn Chris Olave from a very good receiver into a ridiculously good receiver.
Yeah, this is the Chris Olave propaganda portion of the show. I was a massive Olave fan. Couldn't be happier about this particular addition for the Saints. Clancy Brown's a tight end coach, 34 years of coaching experience. I love this. Even split between college and the pros, 17 and 17. Pretty rare to see an exactly balanced resume like that. And then Jari Evans is an offensive assistant with this team. Not offensive line assistant, just offensive assistant. Again, kind of a junior Rick Dennison. We're going to assign you to whatever we want given the week. Saw Jari at the Shrine Bowl. He was helping the Saints with the scouting process. A lot of the O-linemen came out and they're like, yeah, I met with the Saints. It was Jari Evans asking me questions, which is the coolest thing to see from both sides.
Just young players geeking out. It's great.
Yeah, the best. Defensive and special teams. Peter Genta, senior defensive assistant. Again, they have one on the offensive side. They should have one on the defensive side as well. 44 years of coaching experience, 32 in the NFL. Brian Young is the pass rush specialist. Say that 3 times fast. One of the tags we see applied more often in the modern NFL, where they're not giving them necessarily a position title, but just saying, look, we need you to help guys get to the quarterback, and you did it for a long time in your own career. 15th season with the Saints as a coach. Now,
been there forever.
That makes you feel old. Played 9 years in the NFL with the Rams and Saints on his own, and now is one of the leading pass rush specialists in the league. Marcus Robertson is the secondary coach. 16th year of NFL coaching, which doesn't seem possible to me because I remember him as a player. Spent the last 4 with the Cardinals as their DB coach, was on the Broncos staff with Joe Woods, and the Raiders with Dennis Allen. So when you wonder sometimes why guys get jobs in the NFL, it's like, well, he coached with the head coach here and the DC here. They probably got together and said, hey, we need somebody for the secondary. And they both went, well, you worked with Marcus. I've worked with Marcus. Let's go get Marcus.
It's a really intriguing staff, especially on the offensive side. I thought the Keith Williams and Benton hires in particular were the most impactful, because those are the two guys brought in to, I don't want to say fix areas of need, because receiver didn't necessarily need to be fixed, but it did need to be elevated, because their top 2 with Olave and Shaheed, as good as they were, should have been more productive, should have been even better. And I think they're trying to get them up to the level that they know they can play at. And then on the offensive line, like, obviously a change needed to be made there. So I think it's a strong hiring season for their, like, I don't know the best way to phrase it. I just think that their assistants now are better than their assistants last year. And maybe that will go a long way towards getting this team to play like they should be able to play, or at least put up results that they should be able to put up. And that in itself is a great transition to our underdog top 3, because this entire segment is dedicated to values, right? We do this for all 32 teams. What are the best 3 values for every single team when it comes to fantasy football? I'm sure a lot of you guys are doing fantasy prep right now, and you're wondering, okay, well, who do we target at a value for every single team? This is kind of a unique situation. because Chris Olave is already going as wide receiver 12, so we don't really associate him with value, right? But the reason why we do this section after the coaching section and after the scheme section is so that we can give you context why we both think Chris Olave at wide receiver 12 is a value.
Right.
Historically speaking, this system, all it does is feed targets to the number one. You look at Andre Johnson, you look at Pierre Garçon back in the day. History is littered with X receivers in this offense that get just crazy amounts of targets, crazy amounts of yards, because it's built for that. It is purpose built to have that one guy that dominates everybody, right? And then when you also factor in the addition of Keith Williams, who was brought in to really get Olave ready to be that kind of guy, that kind of producer, that kind of true number one, where everything runs through him. Like, the Saints are telling you what kind of year Chris Olave is about to have.
Yep.
And it's not wide receiver 12. It's probably higher than that.
Yeah, the whole system's built to funnel targets to that position. We were already fans of the player. Fan of Chris Olave coming out in the draft from Ohio State. Really impressed with his first couple of years. I think, again, he didn't get as much attention from those years as he would have in some other places, despite his performances, which deserved him. And now they're basically just doubling down and saying, we're going to give you even more. We're going to give you more opportunities. We're going to give you more. And we believe better coaching. We are going to try and maximize you. And we've talked about maximizers a bunch during this series. Again, they didn't play poorly last year, but they think they can turn the dial up, and they're trying to, and they're telling you that they're going to. So 12 might seem high. At the end of the year, it's probably not going to seem high.
I would also say Rashid Shaheed at wide receiver 55, also a big value. Again, we say everything's running through Olave, and it is. Like, by a lot, it will. But there still are some more targets to be had, especially like third down targets. Typically it's like the number one is getting a bunch of the early down work. He's getting the shot plays off play action, everything like that. But on third down, you still need the other guy who's going to be the chain mover. And I think Rashid Shaheed is well suited for that. He's a great separator, reliable hands and all that. So I would say he's probably going to do the majority of the third down work, where Olave is going to get the majority of the yards and catches overall. But that third down work is still worth more to me than wide receiver 55. I could see him being high 30s, low 40s, which is still a value.
For sure, and I think they're going to try and get more out of the limited targets that he does get, because he's an explosive guy. He's got really good quickness. Again, we talked about their lack of yards after the catch. This system is, I don't want to say predicated on yards after the catch, but it's built to create them. And Shaheed's a guy that can pay that off. So even if it's a lower number of targets in volume overall, he's probably going to be getting more out of each one, or at least the system is designed to get him more out of each one. So I'm with you. 55 feels a little bit low to me. And at the end of the season, clearly going to be wide receiver number 2 on this offense, or target number 2, let's put it that way. In the past, more of those targets have gone to the running back position. I think some still will, but we're going to see an emphasis placed on receivers. Shaheed's clearly number 2. He can get more out of them. They hope they can get more out of him than they did last year. That's the whole point of bringing in Williams and really changing the offense. I think he'll do better than 55.
Well, speaking of running back, I think there is a discussion that needs to be had about Alvin Kamara. He's going as running back 17 right now. For me, that's not really a value. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Kamara finishes below that. This is probably going to be even more of a committee than even past Saints backfields. And the Saints have always been known for running a committee approach. But Alvin Kamara used to be, when he was in his prime. I don't think he's in his prime anymore. When he really had that prime explosiveness, he could work off of limited touches and still be extraordinarily productive. He was a great red zone threat. He was a great receiver. He was Alvin Kamara. He was awesome. Yep. I don't necessarily think he has that same kind of juice. So if he's still getting the limited touches, I think he's going to do not more with less like he used to. I think he's going to do less with less. And so that kind of brings up the discussion of like, all right, well, if you are going to take a Saints running back, who are you doing? For me, the only one that's actually a true value is going to be Kendre Miller, who's going as running back 44 right now. Do I think that any of them are going to finish in the top 24? No. Do I think Kendre Miller will exceed his current ADP the most out of all three? Yes. I'm still not really prioritizing the Saints run game here, just because I think it's going to be so committee-ish, and sure, it's going to be a nightmare if you're playing in a traditional league to try to figure out which one to start. That's why we play best ball, so we don't have to deal with that. You know, if you take Kendre Miller and he only has 5 weeks where he pops off, well, in best ball, you get credit for that. That's what makes best ball great. So again, play that on Underdog Fantasy. But I would say Kendre Miller has a higher likelihood in the current mix in the Saints backfield to have 5 of those monster weeks than Alvin Kamara or Jamal Williams. At least that's how I see it, because he's the youngest guy. He's the most explosive guy. I think he suits this system really well in terms of the run schemes that we think they're going to prioritize. Again, are any of them going to finish top 24? Probably not. Does he have the best chance to finish as like RB 28? I would probably say yes.
See, you're just trying to butter up our underdog colleague Hayden Winks.
Oh, he loves Kendre Miller.
He's a big Kendre Miller guy, so he's loving this. Shout out to Hayden. If you don't follow his work, you absolutely should. But I'm with you. I think this is a year where we see Alvin Kamara move from what has been, for a long time, a dominant sort of primary role where he was the first consideration in a lot of what the Saints were doing, whether by design or just, hey, we dumped it off to him and he made it happen. So again, that gives him familiarity with the quarterback and comfort. That's been happening less and less. I think we see that pattern continue. I don't see a rebound occurring. And generally by mid-season, the offensive staff's going to say, hey, we have to split these touches at least evenly. And by the end of the season, down the stretch, when you want these guys to be contributing, I wouldn't be surprised if he's been deprioritized and is the second or possibly even third option. He struggled with injuries as well. It's a long season. He is not short in the tooth as running backs go. A lot of tread off the tires. So I think this is the year we start to see that transition happen in full. And I would say it happens as early as midseason.
It's crazy, too, just like how fast it happens for a running back, right? He's only 28.
Yeah, but it's like a buddy of mine that used to work on electrical stuff, and electrical stuff is not my forte. It's one of the things I'll pay people to do because it's just not what I'm really comfortable with. And it always seemed weird to me how electrical stuff fails. And they're like, nope, it's basically binary. It's either 1 or 0, on or off. It works until it doesn't, and then it doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. Like it literally just burns out and it's done. It just happens one day. And running backs, to me, feel that way a lot of the time. There's very, very rarely do we see late career strong resurgence, right? We see sort of re-leveling a little bit or plateauing on the way down. Even that's rare. What we see more often is 28, 29, 30, especially 31. They get to a point and they just cannot do it anymore. It's a young man's game, and that's why teams cycle through running backs.
The only ones that I can think that get to their late 20s like that, right, after being the guy for a long time, that still hold up and play really well are like Frank Gore, you know, who's one of the greatest running backs ever.
Yep.
Derrick Henry, who's one of the greatest running backs ever.
Yeah.
And, you know, just kind of defy that timetable.
Yeah, we've been saying it about Henry for 3 years now. Got to be the year. Got to be the year. Got to be the year. He's like, not happening. But again, that's a handful of guys out of hundreds and hundreds of running backs that we've seen over the past, say, decade. And it's much more common that these guys get to 28, 29, 30, especially 31, and that's it. You don't hear from them again. They have a couple more stops. This is the veteran guy in the room. It's the third option, but that's it. They're done.
Even if you think Alvin has one more good year left in him, I think the odds of that happening are, in terms of him like putting up, you know, top monster 12 running back levels, yeah. Right? Not even monster, just top 12 to 15.
Yeah.
I think the odds of him still being somewhere in that range are low enough that I would rather just, again, look at the value we're getting with Kendre Miller and say, I think I want to invest in something safer that has higher odds of finishing in that range. A different running back who's younger, maybe is just on a better offense overall. Maybe somebody who's going to get more goal line work, like whatever reason you have, right? Somebody who we just think has a higher percentage of hitting that top 12 to 15, like say Joe Mixon in Houston, right? He's going to be in an elite offense. He's going to get all the goal line work. Like there's a path to him scoring a bunch of touchdowns, getting a bunch of receptions, everything like that. I would probably look at Joe Mixon and say, yeah, I feel better about that. Let me grab Kendre Miller super late in the draft rather than taking an older Alvin Kamara and just hoping everything's still the same. Like, I wouldn't sleep very well at night for that.
No, please don't change. Please don't change.
Please don't turn into a pumpkin now.
Right, and it feels like the pumpkin status is much more likely. Now, hopefully he's got another year in him for Saints fans. That would be ideal. It's a much better and stronger way to go out. But the likelihood, you have to play probability, and the likelihood of that happening is just lower.
I would encourage people to come back to Kendre Miller's ADP as we get deeper into camp and deeper into preseason, because there's been wild swings already. Like I'm talking 30, 40 spots already in his ADP just from a couple months ago. So if you're watching this late in the summer, RB44 might not even apply anymore.
Yeah.
So again, take it with a grain of salt for now. We're recording this on June 6th. By the time we get to camp, he could be RB30. We'll see. So again, go on Underdog Fantasy, keep up with his ADP, do all your best ball drafts. I would say best ball drafts on Underdog are a good way to prepare for your home leagues as well, because they're I would say best ball drafts on Underdog hold more value because people have incentive to stay in and draft all the way through. Because again, you're tossing $2 into a league. You're not just going to leave after the first 2 picks and let auto draft do the rest. Like you're actually going to try and play, right? So I would say mock drafts, or treating Underdog best ball drafts like your mock drafts is a good way to spend your time, because you're going to get a real look at how people actually draft. And just pay attention while you're doing those to where Kendre Miller is going, because I'd bet Miller now versus Miller in mid-August are going to be 2 very different conversations. So with all that being said, let's get to March. Let's get to free agency. Everything this team did to remake their roster, at least slightly remake their roster, try to improve on that 9-win total from last year. EJ, take it away.
Got to start with Michael Thomas. Big name for the Saints for a long time. Officially, it's a void year that counts. 42% of the snaps last year. Again, age 31. Hasn't really ever been the same since the late career injury he suffered. He's officially no longer a Saint. Marcus May. 40% of the snaps last year was a big free agent signing when he got to New Orleans. He too is gone. And then they just spent a lot of work on cleaning out sort of the bottom end of the offensive line. James Hurst, Try Turner, Cameron Irving, Max Garcia, all gone. None of them played. I mean, Hurst played a significant amount of snaps because he had to, not necessarily because they wanted him to.
Not because they wanted him to, yeah.
But again, all those guys have moved on. Eno Benjamin, one of our favorites who's bounced around and hasn't found a home, is also no longer a Saint. Isaac Edam, the corner, is with the 49ers. Jameis Winston, I don't know how to classify Jameis Winston's tenure with the Saints, but he is now with the Browns. Zach Bond, a linebacker who I think moved to a better place. We really liked Zach Bond coming out in the draft. Never really happened for him. He didn't bomb in New Orleans, but he never ascended the way we thought he would. And now he goes to the Eagles. And
I want to clarify, he's not dead when we say he's in a better place. He's alive. He's just
not
in Philly.
He has not ascended to Nirvana. He's gone to play for the Eagles, and I actually think that might be a better landing spot for him. We'll see. And then Andres Pete, I would also classify in that movement on the offensive line, where we've got a new offensive line coach. We want a bunch of new talent. So literally 5 guys from the sort of lower half of the Saints offensive line are no longer Saints. That really was the sort of story of who they let go in the offseason.
And honestly, they had Pete playing tackle last year. He's not a tackle, he's a guard. But they were just kind of in that situation where they had to do it. results weren't good.
No, they were looking for their best five, and they want a different best five this year.
A significantly different best five. I would say the most intriguing one is Jameis Winston to me, just because of how it ended. You know, with that Jamal Williams thing against the Falcons where the players made a call in the field and Dennis Allen didn't agree with it. And a lot of Saints fans were really upset at Dennis Allen for like apologizing to the Falcons. And I'm kind of torn on it because on one end, like it's the Falcons, right? Like, of course, they're going to try to rub their nose in it.
You're supposed to hate them.
And, you know, the team loves Jamal and they were trying to do right by Jamal. But at the same time, it's like if your coaches tell you to do something and you completely ignore that, like, I don't know. The vibes were so weird at the end of the Saints season because of that incident, I guess you want to call it. And I still don't really know how I feel about it, like all the way, one way or the other. I would love to get Saints fans' opinions on it because it's just, again, it's almost kind of emblematic of what the Saints were last year, which is just weird.
Strange vibes for sure. It felt more like a high school rivalry thing or even a, college rival game thing. That typically, I mean, I know we're talking about players that all came from those ranks, but there's a line you cross when you get to being a professional football player. And if your coach says do one thing and you do another, pretty much, as you admit, just on your own dime, consequences, man. Like, we do that at our jobs, right? We say, oh, we're going to do one thing. And we go, no, we're not going to do that. And we go off in our own direction. Yeah, you bear responsibility for that. Now, in terms of against the Falcons, sure, Saints and Falcons hate each other. I get it. But it is odd. And, did it contribute? We'll never know. Like, they might have just been, as a player, we don't want to spend that money anymore. But it didn't help. I'll tell you that.
It's just odd. The whole thing is just odd.
Fully agree.
In terms of retentions, on their own team as well as third-party additions, Ryan Ramczyk did kind of a incentive-based restructure and incentives based on All-Pro, Pro Bowl, but mostly playing time. There's like 6 or 7 million in incentives just for playing time, which to me signals they're not sure he's going to have a lot of playing time trying to come back from that injury. Some people have floated maybe he might have to medically retire. We'll see. Either way, they got some cap relief from that restructure. It's Mario Davis is back. Tyrann Mathieu is back. Rashid Shaheed, who we mentioned earlier, is back on a dirt cheap deal, by the way. He's making less than $1 million this year, which is crazy.
Unreal. In
terms of third-party additions, they brought in Chase Young. Speaking of injury red flags that we'll just have to see. Chase Young at $13 million a year. Willie Gay Jr., they brought over from the Chiefs at $3 million a year. And Ced Wilson to be wide receiver 3 for them, or at least I assume wide receiver 3 for them, at about $2.9 million, which again for the current receiver market, that's what 1/12 of what Justin Jefferson makes. So yeah, it seems all right for a guy as good as Ced Wilson to be your number 3. So yeah, overall, not a whole lot of crazy money spent, which for the Saints is probably a good thing because they're still trying to get everything under control. Cap-wise for the long term, not just kind of playing musical chairs every single year. Like, they're trying to get shit under control.
Aren't they always trying to get shit under control with the cap?
But they're being responsible about it. I'll give them that.
I think responsible is a sliding scale in New Orleans.
It just feels like for the first time in a long time, Mickey is not writing checks that future Mickey is going to have to cash.
Yeah, that's a tomorrow Mickey problem.
They just took a year off from that, and they're like, all right,
ease up.
Let's get shit settled for a little bit, and then we'll go back to spending crazy money in 2025. But everything made sense. Everything was responsible. Again, the Jameis thing was intriguing, but maybe I'm reading more into that than what's there. I just felt like the Saints were being fairly chill in free agency for once, which is a nice change of pace.
It is interesting to see how they devoted those dollars to the wide receiver room and how few those dollars are for literally 2 of their top, let's just say 4 starters, depending on whether or not they're going to roll A.T. Perry out there as wide receiver 3 or whether it's Ced Wilson. Like that, they do not have a lot of dollars outside of Olave, and even not for him because he's on his rookie contract. If you look at the overall money spent, Saints wide receiver core has got to be one of the lowest dollar units in the league.
Oh, it has to be.
Has to be.
They don't have anybody making more than. Actually, let me look at what Olave is making this year.
Like 10?
I'm fascinated by this, actually. So this year, Olave is making, his base salary is $985,000. His cap hit is $5.3 million, and he's the most expensive receiver
By far.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. It's unreal that you've got 4 guys that we kind of like, and you're paying like less than $1 million for a couple of them.
For both your starters are making less than $1 million in salary.
That is a rare circumstance in the NFL.
Also, you want to know how much the Saints are projected to be over the cap next year? Honestly, this probably gives more context for why they didn't spend anything this year. They're trying to be a little responsible. Just take a guess of what they are over it next year.
I don't know, 62 million?
85. It's hilarious.
Yeah, future
so
Mickey's
funny.
Problems coming home to roost.
I didn't even look at that before we started this section. I was like, now that I think about it, like, why were they uncharacteristically responsible? Like, what's coming down the pipe? Oh, shit, $85 million.
Yeah,
Cool.
balloon payment you got to make or you're going to lose the shop.
It's like, I wonder whose void years are slamming home all at once next year. Good God. All right. Well, March was relatively uneventful, but good. It was solid. They didn't go crazy. That brings us to April, where, honestly, pretty fun draft. Not a huge class, only 7 picks. I don't even know how many. Yeah, they didn't have any 3rd or 4th rounders.
Yeah.
They had a bunch of day 3 guys, only 2 picks in the first 50, and then didn't have another one till 150. But the values they got with those day 3 picks, they got several guys that could have gone in the 3rd or 4th round, and it would have made sense.
I really like this draft from a strategic standpoint. I think one of the worst kept secrets in the league was that New Orleans was going to go tackle with their first pick. They needed it. It was the clear upgrade spot that they had to address. They hadn't done it in free agency or couldn't do it in free agency because they didn't have the dollars to do it. So it became very clear that Saints were going to get a tackle. They go out and get Talisi Fuaga, the offensive tackle out of Oregon State, whose high school is right over there, about 12 miles.
Tumwater?
No, he didn't go to Tumwater. He went to Mount Tahoma. He's actually a Tacoma kid. But had a great career at Oregon State. They get him at the 14th pick overall in the first round. They come back again with their only other top pick in the top 50, which is second round 41. They get Kool-Aid McKinstry, the corner out of Alabama, the other corner, but it's hard to call him the other corner. Yes, Terrian went first, but Kool-Aid, extremely talented, fits very well with what they like to do. Pairing him with a guy like Marshawn Lattimore, that's a really nice tandem. It was a strong pick. And then they drop all the way to the 5th round. Next pick is 150. They get Spencer Rattler, the very talented and well-traveled quarterback out of South Carolina, who's changed quite a bit over the last few years of his college career. I actually like that. I thought that, like you said, was a great grab where they got him, and is going to give them a viable option for QB2 or QB3 from now on. Could he be a guy that ascends to starter status? He has that potential physically. We'll see. I don't think anybody's counting on that. But at 150, I thought it was a really solid value.
It was later than I expected him to go just because of how valuable not just quarterback is, but also backup quarterback. If you're looking at the amount of quarterbacks that get starts in the NFL year over year, the average is more than 2 per team. Get starts year over year. I want to say it was like 70-something last year that got starts. So it's not enough just to have a QB1. I mean, even Derek Carr last year was dealing with injuries, right? Played through some stuff, but like you need to have a second guy. You're only as good as your backup quarterback. And how many times do we see teams that don't have backup quarterback buttoned up and their season goes completely in the tank because of that? You look at the Jets last year. They were completely over-indexed on Aaron Rodgers. That lasted 4 snaps. They were fucked after that. So, yeah, you take swings at backup quarterback. The Saints had a good one last year in Jameis. But you keep taking swings at it so that you are insulated from your entire season going to waste because one guy gets rolled up on. Like, you have to take swings at backup. And that's what this was. And it was a good one.
And the probability says you're going to And that's going to happen even more often as the season gets longer and there's more games, more injuries will occur, and you just can't not have somebody in the number 2 role that can win you a couple of those 3, 4, hopefully no more than 5 or 6 games. Your starter's down. It's just not a responsible take as an NFL team anymore to say, oh, we're all in on number 1 and number 2's whatever. We'll get what we get. Thought it was a great move from that perspective. Bub Means, the wide receiver out of Pittsburgh, 20 picks later, again in the 5th round at 170. Tall, fast guy that I liked his potential. I did not think even in this talented wide receiver class that he would be available late in the 5th. He was. Again, they add to that cheapest receiving core in the league with another talented guy. Jalen Ford, the linebacker out of Texas, really liked this pick. 5th round, 175. I think he's a talented two-way defender that was a bit underrated. Saints just picking up dollars that other people dropped late in the draft. And then our guy, Christian Boyd, the interior defensive lineman from Northern Iowa, way down in the 6th at 199, did crack the top 200. I think he's much more talented than that. This is a boon for the Saints. Saints fans, you're going to love this guy. We interviewed him at the Shrine Bowl. Absolute wrecker. Comes with a plan. Great physical profile. Plays hard every snap. I think he fits a lot of what the Saints defense has done in the past. Joe Woods is going to love this guy. He absolutely makes the team 100%. Then their last pick, Josiah Ezrim, the offensive tackle out of Eastern Kentucky. 7th round, 239 overall.
Love the Christian Boyd pick. Again, he absolutely is going to make the team. I would bet a significant chunk of money on that. He's going to probably back up Colin Saunders to start. Kind of being a defensive tackle that can do anything from playing a shade all the way out to a 3.
A similar player, too.
Similar player, similar build.
Yep.
Just a very powerful squatty body with some pass rush versatility. Very different than the other interior defensive lineman they took last year, and Brian Bresee. I can't imagine 2 more different DT prospects than those 2 guys. They just have very different skill sets, but I think they're going to complement each other very well going forward. The Jalen Ford pick, love that. He's a great zone coverage linebacker. He's a bigger dude. He's more of like a classic throwback, like 240 plus pound plugger, but with great zone instincts. Like, he's a guy who, when he's dropping into a hook zone, like, he's going to follow a quarterback's eyes, break on the ball, like, actually pick it off. Like, really good zone coverage defender, as well as a good run defender as well. Bub Means, I'm kind of with you, just because of how talented he is, even in this receiver class. I thought he could have gone, starting in late 4 would have made sense to me, to get him in the 5th round, just to add into the room. Like, they got a bunch of guys as it is. He'll push for wide receiver 5 on this team. I don't know if he'll beat out everybody, because you got Olave at 1, you got Shaheed at 2, and then it'll be either Ced Wilson or A.T. Perry at 3, and then he's competing with probably Equinemius St. Brown for wide receiver 5 in terms of who gets activated. So maybe it'll come down to special teams. I don't know, but he's got a shot to make it. So again, we're just talking about 3 day 3 picks that all have a shot to make the final 53. That's great. Actually, 4 day 3 picks if you count Spencer Rattler. Kool-Aid's going to be great for them because this team played the 2nd most man coverage in all of the NFL last year at like 32%. Only Cleveland was higher, so he kind of fits their profile of somebody who we can leave on an island and just trust it. And then, of course, Fuaga. If they took anything other than tackle at 14, they were going to be wrong. So
I think it would have been a bigger shocker than what Atlanta did with their 1st round pick.
100%.
Yeah.
If they came out and they took like Brock Bowers instead of a tackle, I think Saints fans would have checked out for the rest of the draft. Like, all right, we're done. See you in 2025. Yeah. That brings us to UDFAs. By the way, they did have a very large UDFA class. Kyle Sheets, freak of nature out of Slippery Rock. He's going to try to compete with Bub for that wide receiver 5 spot. Unless they decide to carry 6. Maybe they will. Who knows?
We'll see.
Could see him also making the practice squad. Jacob Caboti, the running back out of Louisiana, could potentially make the practice squad. Dallin Holker might make the final 53.
I bet he does.
For this TE group. Like, they don't necessarily have somebody like Dallin Holker. And by that, I mean he could be getting sucked into a black hole and he's still going to make the catch. Like, that dude will catch anything. He's kind of Mr. Third Down himself, too. So I could see him making the team just for that, because if he's on the field and you throw him the ball, he's coming down with it. Sincere Haynesworth, the center out of Tulane, probably a practice squad guy. Miller Bradford, the safety out of TCU, might make the final 53 for special teams versatility. And Matthew Hayball, very highly regarded punter out of Vandy. Some thought he was the second best punter in this class. For me, I probably would have had him punter 3 behind Ray Cow and Torrey Taylor. But still, very highly regarded punter. Picking him up undrafted, he has a shot to make it as well.
Not only a large UDFA class, but an incredibly strong one. A lot of talent here that I thought was going to be drafted. Dallin Holker especially. I was very surprised he wasn't drafted. One of the most talented tight ends in college football last year. One of the most productive tight ends in all of college football last year. Again, runs his routes very well, is tremendous asset at the catch point. Sincere Haynesworth, a lot of people before the season thought that he had a grade that could have had him drafted in, say, the 5th round. And Millard Bradford, the guy out of TCU, the safety, already has 2 INTs already in OTAs. He's starting to be one of those guys that makes early noise, gets coaches' attention. People are like, I don't know that we can leave that guy unprotected. Maybe he slides onto the practice squad because he didn't have a super high profile, but he's already playing well in that defense. So again, early returns are good. Cabote was really talented, just didn't kind of have the production that some of the top backs in this class had. I would not be surprised at all to see him next year as like the Saints RB3. Very, very good haul for, again, a team that is pinching pennies, watching for the balloon payment to come due next year, needs a lot of cheap talent, and just kind of raked through the UDFA process, pulled out a lot of gems.
So, with all that being said, brings us to our final segment. 2 segments, really. So we ask and answer 2 different questions to end each episode. First question is, did this team get better? You're looking at how they finished last year. Are they better, worse, or are they roughly the same based on, all the additions and subtractions combined? Like, did they kind of come out the same in the wash? There's debate about this, right? Because you're asking a team to get better when through a lot of metrics they should have been one of the 6 to 10 best teams in the league, right? But at the same time, they didn't produce results like that. So really the question is, if this team gets better, does that just mean they're going to play up to what their actual potential already was, right? Which is a kind of a different question, but also the same question. Again, Saints are weird. I know we've been spending an hour plus on this team, and we still don't really have a good answer for that. And so some of you are thinking, well, why the fuck did I watch this? There's nuance here. And at the end of the day, I don't really know, which is why I'm saying thumbs even. I'm not ready to say, yes, this team got better, because they were already theoretically supposed to be a top 6 to 10 team.
Yep.
Is this team more likely than last year's team to be a top 6 to 10 team? I don't think I'm ready to say that. So I'm going to do the cop-out move here and say thumbs even, because quite frankly, in true New Orleans Saints fashion, I got no idea.
Yeah, I'm going to go thumbs even, but I'm not going to call it a cop-out move because I don't think it is. So I'll explain why I'm going to go thumbs even. I like the draft, but outside of Fuaga, none of them are likely to start.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a huge needle mover. They needed a tackle. They got a tackle. That's great. Kool-Aid might start, but Paulson Adebo, he's got to displace him, and he's played pretty well. He's a great third corner. It's not that it's not an asset. It's like, how much are they going to get needle moving out of the draft? This draft right away? And the answer is not much. Fuaga is going to move the needle on the offensive line, but that's it. So it's some, but not a ton. They're going in the right direction, but looking at this roster, I can't say as I stack up last year's roster and this year's roster, like, this one's clearly better. I can't say it's clearly worse either, which is why I'm going to go even. They underachieved last year, so they might positively regress, which means get better, get back towards what they should be. But will it be enough? It's impossible to say, again, with the rest of the division having some improvement as well, and them just being the odd ducks that they are. And, they should be better. They have talent. They could have achieved. They didn't. They were in the middle on points, but then they had this huge burst at the end of the year. All in all, when you just sort of rinse and stir and shake it all out, it's about the same.
The only thing I think I can definitively say is if this team doesn't win double-digit games and make the playoffs, Dennis Allen's getting fired.
Maybe.
I think he is.
I don't
Because you look
disagree.
at last year, again, I think everybody in that building knows they should have been better than they were. They should have won more games than they did. If there's 2 straight years of that,
Yeah.
he's getting fired.
It's possible, but again, New Orleans is weird, and they have a weird tolerance. There was a lot of people that said, hey, the offense was pretty stagnant 2 years ago. Like, what's Pete Carmichael still doing here? They were like, nope, we're running it back. And again, a lot of people were calling for his job last year. So we might look at it and say, look, if you get these same results, what are we doing here? Sometimes a team has a different lens. So I'm not going to say that's guaranteed. I'm going to say it's going to get looked at for sure if there's not an extraordinary circumstance that leads to, a very low win total.
So when looking at ceiling and floor, and again, this is ceiling and wins and floor and wins, they have a pretty narrow cone. My difference is like 3. There's some teams where it's 4 or 5 games, maybe sometimes 6 games of like, it could go really well or really disastrously. I think the Saints are a more narrow cone. And so I put their ceiling at 10 and I put their floor at 7. Like no matter what, they're going to be in the middle of the league for me. And I think that's also why they frustrate me so much, is because I know no matter what, they're going to be in the middle of the league, which is also why I think there could be significant changes after this year. I wanted to look at some of these metrics and be like, do I do 11? Do I do 12? Because that's statistically what they should have been. But at the same time, I'm like,
do you believe that's going to happen with the Saints?
I don't believe it. Not like Dennis Allen, Derek Carr. At some point, you have to be realistic about what this is, right? Solid team, could make the playoffs, could be a bitch and a half to beat, depending on how well they play on the offensive and defensive line. But at the same time, it's like, do I believe in it, though? Like, to really get to that upper echelon, do I believe in it? Nah, not really.
They are what they are, and that sounds like a cop-out, but I, too, have a ceiling of 10 and a floor of 7. I'll start with the floor first. With a defense this good with very few changes and not a ton of big losses, some nice additions, it's hard for a team to be really, truly bad with a defense that's that good. We're talking about a top 10 defense in every metric, against the run, against the pass, and scoring. Like, that is a solid foundation to build a team on. It's not exciting. Fans don't love it all the time, but it is a very solid foundation for a team, and it means you're never going to be like bad. You're never going to be down in the 2-3 win category because your defense is just too good. Offense has to play better. They have to protect better. A lot of these young receivers have to blossom under the coaching that they've brought in, take to the new system, and that's the only way they're going to get towards that ceiling of 10. But I'm with you. When I start thinking about competition, I start thinking about who they are, who they have at quarterback especially, and I start thinking 12 wins out of the Saints? It seems rich to me. Is it possible? It's possible, but I think a much more likely ceiling is double-digit wins, 10, competing for the division title, which again gets you into the playoffs, and after that, all bets are off, especially if you have a strong defense. You can have a good day and advance. You can have a poor day and be one and done. I think that's a much more likely end point for the 2024 Saints.
They're fine. Not every team in this series, are we going to look at them and be like Super Bowl contender?
Yeah.
And not every team are we going to look at in this series and be like, oh, God, this year's going to be garbage.
Contender for the first pick.
Exactly. Contender for the first pick. This is one of those teams where it's dead in the middle and we're like, yeah, they're fine. They're good. They're okay.
They've demonstrated the ability to do it before. They're going to do it again. For Saints fans, look, I hope that it's the 10 wins, competing for the division title, that the offense is exciting, that the team is, I'm not going to say watchable. They're always watchable, but watchable with a little bit less anxiety every Sunday.
It's more watchable with just less confusion.
That too.
Right? Less confusion, less anger. In some Saints fan circles, they'll say less embarrassment.
That too.
Looking at some of the shenanigans that happened with the team last year. And not that they're an embarrassing team. It's just there's a couple moments last year where like, guys, what are we doing?
What are we doing here?
Yeah, I don't know. God, weird team.
Very weird team.
Weird team. Solid team, but weird team. Saints fans, if you disagree with us, I don't blame you whatsoever. Your job is to, support your team and be a fan and be like, no, 12 wins. Like, we got this. Fuck the Falcons. We're winning the South. Like, I get it. That is your job. Our job is to compare this team to the rest of the league and try to make our best guesses. I mean, these are guesses about where they kind of fall in line with everything. So hopefully we didn't infuriate you too much while watching this. It's not our goal. Our goal is just to, talk about your team and just give a different perspective from people that look at every team this time of year. If you do want to support the Saints, by the way, while also sort of supporting us at the same time, not even sort of, actively supporting us at the same time, I am wearing a Saints hoodie right now from our clothing partner over at Homage. I know people watching this from Louisiana probably don't wear hoodies too much in the year, but hey, if you're a Saints fan who's up in the Midwest or the Pacific Northwest and you get good usage out of hoodies, you can check that out at the link in the description below. Or if you want to wear Saints t-shirts because you live in Louisiana and it's 70 to 100 degrees all year long, you can do that as well. Anything you get at that link in the description below, we directly get a cut of it, whether it's Saints gear or any other NFL gear or college gear or bootleg gear, anything you guys get at Homage, we get a cut of it. So we really appreciate that. Thank you once again to all of our patrons, especially our executive producer tier on Patreon for helping to make this show possible. Thank you to our friends over at Underdog. I got nothing else, EJ.
We got plenty more teams coming, but I think we're done talking about this one for now.
We have one more NFC South team to go, talking Tampa Bay tomorrow, and we're also going to pick our division winner for the NFC South tomorrow. So, see you then. Talking Bucks.